Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel, or welcome back if you are someone who's listened to me before. In this upload, I want to make a contribution to the body of ideas about feeling it real or expressing or objectifying our desires. And I want to do that by sharing a testimonial, if you like, about what I have observed about myself and my attitude when I have succeeded in expressing my desires positively versus when I've expressed my desires negatively. And I'll explain a bit more about what I mean when I say positive and negative a little bit later. I also want to add that because I'm trying to speak in really plain terms and completely demystify the process, I won't be making reference to anything esoteric unless it becomes absolutely necessary. But as my thoughts are kind of turning over in my mind, I don't think it will be necessary to use any esoteric references or delve into any mysticism, which I know some people enjoy because they've written to me about it, but I don't think it's necessary here. And in any event, I always think that sort of the mysticism and all that sort of thing is implicit in the practice. So the deeper truths, the hidden truths, they run through all of the concepts and they're revealed by application. And I think that's far more important and valuable than what anyone can tell you. So I'll get straight to my testimonial. I think it's really important for us to remember that we are always expressing our desires. It's kind of an ongoing process. It's not a one and done. It's when you get an impression, you start expressing it straight away in various ways until it reaches full maturity or the picture has fully developed or the plant has fully flowered or however you want to describe it. So it's important to remember that we're always expressing. What changes during that process is our mood. And as our mood changes, so does the form of the expression. So something just occurred to me to mention, this bridge of incidents that we're taking across as we're going from the point of receiving the impression to its absolute fulfillment. We're going to be having mini expressions along the way that are an indication that we're heading to that culminative event. So that's what I'm talking about when I say we're always expressing. In his lecture, The Artist is God, Neville Goddard said that it's our deeper self who determines whether or not something can be done. And I admit this confused me at first when I first read it until I understood that our body of emotion, also known as the deeper self or the soul or the subconscious mind or the higher self, is the sum total of what we humanly feel or feelingly entertain on a human level most deeply and most often. And this body of emotion is the one that sort of sustains the mood, if you like. And it's the mood that influences what our expressions or what our desires look like in physical form. So, this I think leads me quite neatly to the observations I made about my desires that were either expressed as positives or better than expected, and the alternative to that. I noticed, this is speaking about the positives now, that when I completely cut off watching or reading or listening to the so-called news, whether that be political, domestic, foreign, showbiz, sports, whatever, I consistently felt my mood was consistently one of things being possible. I always felt a greater awareness of my own autonomy, and that inspired confidence in me, a sense of freedom. I enjoyed happier social relationships, and so on. And I'm certainly not suggesting that you don't watch the news. I'm just telling you what my experience has been. So when I cut off from something like the news, I found that my mood, my predominant mood, was made up of a sense of freedom, and as I said, a confidence and happier social relationships, and so on. And then what would happen is that my expressions would conform to confirm my mood, both through my perception of what was happening around me and through my experience, my tangible experience of what was happening around me. And I do want to mention here that it's a little tricky for me now to describe what I'm talking about in the context of my having performed any particular metaphysical exercise, because I don't use exercises. I only use the language of emotion to communicate my consent to an expression. So what I'm trying to describe is the fact that when I consented to an expression using the spiritual language of emotion, how that expression looked in physical terms was determined by my mood. So my moods always determined how things would pan out. And this is exactly the same whether you do metaphysical exercises or metaphysical prayer, whatever it is. The principle is just the same. I just want to make that clear. So I'm going to try and give you an example here so that what I'm saying is completely, clear and apparent to everyone. If I receive an impression that I've been given some money, and in my case, I consent using the spiritual language of emotion, that's to say, through an acknowledgement of a particular feeling and an assimilation of that particular feeling, and that feeling is that I've been given money, then if I have a joyful mood, if I have a positive, confident mood, the money will work positively for me. It will show up however it shows up, in the most natural and the quickest way, and it will work for me positively. If I consent in a dour mood, I'm perhaps frightened or angry or whatever it might be, then the money will show up again. But what will happen is that it will perhaps be taken from me quickly without my getting any real benefit or enjoyment from it. So the money is there, but my experience of it differs as my mood does. And this is incontrovertible. And that's what I really want to drive home. I've observed this to be true. This has been my experience. I'm always expressing, we always are expressing, but the mood in which we consent, or the mood through which we receive that desire from God, that impression, will determine what it looks like in physical terms. So going on then to talk about when things haven't gone according to plan, and to reference Neville, I really like when he talks about failure, because I think that's sometimes the interpretation we give when things haven't gone well. What I've discovered is that failure in metaphysics doesn't mean failure to express at all, but rather failure to express the highest or the ideal as God intended when the impression was first made. So it's really important to remember that we are always expressing, but our mood determines what the expression looks like. So we are always feeling it real. We are never not out picturing. We always are, but the out picturing of the desire is determined by the mood. I've said that so many times because I really want to drive that home. So, for example, I've consented, still talking about money. I've been talking actually to everybody about money recently. I've consented to having money, but when I've consented through anxiety and the emotions of frustration and so on, the money is almost instantaneously swallowed up by something. And the good news is that this is an easy fix. You can completely transform your circumstances in an instant by first acknowledging your mood and then changing it before you pray. So this will be you going from, oh, my desires are not becoming a reality, to they absolutely are. Well, they are always a reality. So what you're changing is what that reality looks like by changing your mood before you pray. And this is what Neville is talking about when he says that we should cultivate the correct receptive mind. I used to grapple a lot with doubt and things like that in the early days. Um, I would sometimes pretend that I didn't feel the doubt, but I realized that if things were going to change for me, I'd have to undergo an attitude change and admit to myself that I wasn't always sure of what I was doing. I wasn't sure if anything that Neville was saying was really true, and that I was quite afraid of trusting in this process. So what I decided was that I absolutely had nothing to lose, and all I was required to do was to change my mood and to remain committed to this new mood, this new high mood, I should say. I subsequently learned that the dialect of a high mood, used in the spiritual language of emotion, is vocabularied by confidence, freedom, inspiration, good health, love, wealth, and on and on. A high mood is characterized by all of those wonderful things or vocabulary. That's what you're communicating to God when you sustain a high mood. And it doesn't have to be relative to anything in particular. It's just the mood in which you feel your best. If you pray in that attitude, your desires will be outpictured in a form that is conducive to your highest good. It's going to be better than the best you ever know. But if you are sloppy or neglectful or don't care or frightened and you just go for it anyway, you will manifest. It just won't be what you want. So I'd go about my daily business in a high mood, not even considering my circumstances, and things would fall into place. And this is a sort of thing that you really have to try for yourself. Focus on your mood, your predominant mood, and you will always express things as you want them to be. You don't have to focus on what it is you're trying to express. You're always expressing. The moment you become aware of an impression and you acknowledge and assimilate that impression, we normally typically call them desires, you instantly start to outpicture. That's a natural process and it's not something that you can stop or do anything about. And the picture will build and build until it reaches its own fulfillment. But if you make sure or ensure that you are constantly in a high mood, you will outpicture the desire itself in its best possible form. We are expressing all the time, whether we use metaphysical prayer or, as I've said before, we're communicating using the spiritual language of emotion. Our moods determine the forms our desires take. So that's just me sharing my little testimonial with you, my observations about feeling it real. It's not about what you're trying to manifest. The moment you receive an impression, a desire for something, that is a signal that you have been given something. What you need to take care of is your predominant mood, because that is going to determine what the desire looks like. It's also going to determine how quickly the desire reaches its maturity, because when we are in a high mood, we are actually operating as our higher self, which is an issue for another day, but do take my word for it. And if we are operating as our higher selves, we are letting go, we are relinquishing control, or handing over, I should say, control to our higher selves, and our desires have to materialize much more quickly. Please put this theorem to the test and see what happens as you are really careful about sustaining a positive mood. Just see how quickly your desires become a physical reality, and more than that, that they appear exactly or even better than you want them to be. Thank you for listening, and until we are together again, stay phenomenally you.